Welcome everyone to ORSP's Faculty Forum. We're thrilled to have our presenter here today, Kirstin Rossi, because as you know, high impact practices, some of that international immersion stuff, we love it, and we're all going to hear more about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. I'm super excited to be here. So just a quick little funny thing about the title of this presentation. So I don't see myself as like this great writer, but I work with Dr. Thorson, who I will talk a little bit about later as well, who is this like magician with words, right? So we were talking about this presentation. I'm like, I'm trying to come up with this really great title, and so we kind of processed through and maybe this. So we came up with this great, really long title, and I said to her, it should be put on your resume because we have the longest title of all of the faculty forums, so like we win. We win the prize of the wordiest title amongst wordy titles. So in general, today, what I would like to talk a little bit about is the work that we are doing that stemmed from an international immersion trip, and kind of taking that high impact practice for students that we created and we've developed and have now moved into some research and collaboration with our partners for that international immersion trip. So that's what that big, huge title really means. So a little bit about our immersion trip to start. So my colleague, Dr. Kathy Thorson, before I arrived here on campus, had this lovely idea to take students over to Europe to have an immersion experience with people that she had worked with previously. And she had begun to develop that program actually the year that I was hired. She was finalizing that. So when I got here, I was visiting campus and she said, hey, so now that you've accepted the position, there's also this other trip where for a month we go to Europe and maybe you want to come. And I was like, wait, say that one more time. So it came to be that the two of us led the first trip to Prague. So we do that through a FLE grant through the university, which pays for a chunk of the students' fees for the trip. And so it is a faculty-led international immersion experience. The trip that we take is open to unified early childhood majors only because while we're there, they take 2 courses and those courses are within the degree and certification, so they don't add any time to their program to go on this trip. It's actually classes that they have to take anyways. We just embed them in the trip. We travel through Central Europe. We start in Dresden, Germany, so it tends to be a smaller city that our students can get used to traveling in public transportation. Oh my gosh, I don't speak German. How do I order a coffee? Those kinds of situations before we then move into the Czech Republic. And we spend a little over 2 weeks in the Czech Republic, and then we move on to Austria and then Poland. So those are the 4 countries we visit. When we're in the Czech Republic is when their student teaching experience happens. And this is where our students go into an English immersion school. And when they're at the English immersion school, they're able to teach English language learners. Part of the Unified Early Childhood program is a general education certification and a special education certification. And so when they leave, the idea is that any child that comes into their classroom, they're able to teach, including those who are English language learners. So this is a really rich experience for our students to be themselves immersed in a new culture, new language, so they get a little bit of an understanding of what it's like to be in the language minority. I don't know how to ask for that coffee. How do I ask for directions? How do I navigate the day-to-day components of life in a culture, in a society, with a language that I'm unfamiliar with? But it also gives them the opportunity to practice teaching English language learners within this Czech school. So we partner with a company called Upward English. Upward English is a nonprofit organization, and they are working within the Czech public schools. So they are a separate entity from the Czech public schools, but work within them, if that makes sense. And one of the people who founded the Upwards English Company is actually, her dad lives in Menominee, Wisconsin, so right up the road. So she is American born. English is her L1. She married a man from the Czech Republic whose L1 is, Czech, who lived in the Czech Republic growing up. So we have kind of both sides of the partnership in their marriage, I guess you could say, and what they started in terms of a company. So that partnership has been something that has grown over the years. We have done 2 immersion trips, and so what was very interesting in our first trip was that there was a significant amount of apprehension on the part of the Czech teachers to have our students in their classroom. So part of the trip, or part of the student teaching, they student taught with Upward English teachers. So those are English native speakers. These are people that are hired from America, Australia, or England to teach English. The other part of the day they get to spend in Czech classrooms. So they get to observe what happens in a Czech classroom with a Czech native speaker teaching. And so when we first got there, there was a significant amount of apprehension on the part of the Czech teachers to have our students there. And so at first it was very much a check for us in terms of what's wrong with us? Why don't they want us in their classroom? Do they think that we don't know? Do they think that the students aren't prepared? Right? All of these things start going through your minds. And so part of our learning experience was to find out that it actually had everything to do with the apprehension of the Czech teachers to try and speak English to a native English speaker. Because the Czech teachers had grown up in the education system in the Czech Republic where if you did not do something perfect or very well, you were publicly shamed. Right? So this is a society where in schools, children are still lined up in grade order. You got 100 on the test, you're over here and highly praised. You got a 50 on the test and you were stupid and you didn't do it well, and now all of your friends know about it, right? So that's the system that they were educated in. And so to think about having a native English speaker in their classroom, watching them teach, and them also attempting to speak English with a native speaker was beyond their comfort level. And so it wasn't anything to do with us in terms of personality or had we offended anyone, but rather they were apprehensive about us being in their classroom because they were unsure about their language. They were unsure about expectations. And so through that first trip, we eked the door open, if you will. And so as the weeks went on, more and more teachers volunteered to have our students in their classroom because 1 or 2 the first day said, okay, they can come in and talk to our students. And our students went in and played games. They did very simple vocabulary games. And all of a sudden the teachers realized like, oh, so this is really fun. And they were listening to our students trying to speak Czech, which always was hilarious because it was never the correct word or the right pronunciation, right? And so as we began to eke that door open. By the time we were leaving, we had more teachers that wanted students in their classrooms than we had students. And it was really kind of bringing that barrier, that wall down, and helping the Czech teachers understand what we were there for and how we were there to support and to engage with students, but also that native English speakers are not so scary to talk to, that we are people too, that we're trying to learn Czech and we're going to make mistakes just like they're going to make mistakes with English. And so it really, that first trip was a huge step in the process of that collaboration. At the end of that trip, the principal, so in the Czech Republic, principals are elected, not hired. So it's a political position as well as an administrative position. And so the principal actually gave every one of our students a gift from the school. She got a big cake. She said, thank you for coming. I hope you can come every year. She invited us to be part of it. They had like the professional like school pictures. She had a big picture taken with us in it. And our partners in Upward English said that in the 8 years they had been at that school, they had never been asked to be part of the all school faculty picture. So it was just one of those things in that first trip where we were like, okay, so we're learning a little bit more about the schools. We're learning a little bit more about this culture. We're helping in some ways to support Upward English within the school, but we're also helping students, our students and myself and Dr. Thorson, to really understand our role there. Right? And so it's that duality piece. And so we started making those connections, right? So that first piece in terms of that educational connections was for our students going, how is it that I understand these different pieces about education and I understand the ramifications of public shaming, but I just watched a teacher line their children up in order of testing. Okay, so kind of debriefing on that. Why would a person do that? Why is that okay here? Why is that not okay in America? What supports in terms of society, in terms of culture, in terms of growing up in America is different from the Czech Republic that makes those things okay or not okay. So a lot of really great discussions happened and a lot of really great connections in terms of the cultural components of education, which is not necessarily something that I think our students had thought about previously, to sitting in a Czech classroom and going, oh, like this is happening. Like I'm watching two kids sob because they failed this test and now they're failing it in front of everyone, right? And so talking about that. So, and also seeing the free nature, if you will, in terms of kids during classes. So one of the big takeaways for our students too was in between classes. So they have math, and then there's a 10-minute break. And then they have reading, and there's a 10-minute break. First graders, during that 10-minute break, there's no grown-up anywhere in sight. They can go anywhere in the school, they can go outside, they can stay inside, they can eat, they can go to bed, anything they want. No oversight by an adult. And at first, our students were, there's no grown-up, what if they walk away? What, you know, all of the things that they were anticipating as being an issue. And then we talked about, so what are the social constructs that support that independence and that piece for students? So there were a lot of positives that our students began to connect to in terms of what students were and weren't able to do there versus what happens in the United States. So a lot of those cross-cultural considerations and comparisons, if you will, started to happen with our students in both the first and the second trip. We also were able to gain a deeper understanding of the application of skills and the realization of that, right? So our students, as well as us as faculty leads, were going in with a perception or this is what I think will happen. And it was very clear in terms of that realization of how can we apply the skills that we know about teaching young children who are learning English as a second language, especially within a culture that is not in America, right? Not something that the students and myself were used to. So we had a lot of collaboration with the Upward English team in terms of what does the application of the skills we know look like in this capacity. And that really helped to bridge communication between the two entities, if you will, and a mutual understanding. And so that discussion, or those discussions, really built that foundation of understanding to begin that process of where we are now. Just so you know, the top picture is one of our students teaching, and the bottom picture is the four of us, so the two people who run Upward English, and then myself and Kathy Thorson in the bottom right. The foundation that educational connection started moved us forward quite a bit. And so we started to be able to identify opportunities through those connections and because of that foundation that we were building. And the first was within the Upward English program. So as I said in the beginning, they are a nonprofit organization who works with kids who are learning English, right? They offer a variety of programs outside of the public school. And while we were there last time, there was an opportunity to write an embassy mini grant. And we thought, yes, let's do this together. It's gonna be great. Because we had built that understanding, or that communication and that collaboration component to our relationship. So we began to write this grant. It was a fantastic grant. It would have been really awesome, but we didn't get that grant. So after we had gone through all of these pieces, we realized, hey, there's some really good stuff here. And we shouldn't stop because we didn't get the grant. We just need to find other ways and other avenues, if you will, to continue the work that we think is really important. And so that the collaboration, if you will, or the connection between what they knew, Upwards English, in terms of the system and the curriculum and the country, and then what Dr. Thorson and I brought to that conversation in terms of best practices, research, etc., we decided we shouldn't waste this information. We shouldn't waste this great opportunity. Let's keep going. We were then able to, through that process, also understand Czech schools a little bit better in terms of how they work, in terms of what they need, understanding the structures around the schools, understanding what it is that they do and don't have, what they need and don't need. And so because we had to research some different things for this grant, all of a sudden, a few things became really apparent to us as we were doing that. And those were directly related into the country. So the country itself has these really great goals, similar to some things that we have here in America, like they want to create 21st century learners. So in their schools, through their schools, they want to make sure that their students are able to compete on a global market with 21st century skills. They want to be able to include more children with special education needs. Right now in that country, if you have any type of disability, you have a couple of choices. One is which you go to a special school. The second is of which is your parents pay for a full-time special ed teacher that follows you around all day long in your general education classes and provides all of the structure for you. Or third, you don't go to school. Those are basically the three options. If you have a very minimal disability, I guess you could say, or one that is easily modified or accommodated for, you can sometimes go to school in the typical school, but right now there isn't a lot of inclusion of kids with special needs. So that is another goal of the country. The third that connected to us was they wanted every child to be able to speak English by the time they left school. And so these were three great goals, and we thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This connects just the things that we do and we are passionate about. And so we started doing all of this research in terms of Okay, so what are they doing? Yes, not much. So there's really this unbelievable lack of implementation, right? So they have all these great goals, and there's nothing happening related to them. I mean, we have no experience of that here in America, so that's good. So we began to think about, okay, what is our role in this? Our being Dr. Thorson and mine, as well as our Upward English partners together. What is our role in helping and supporting this country in these goals that they have? And so Elaine and Marek in conversation said, we should be at the forefront of this. This is in our mission statement. This is our belief system. We already have kids in our programs who have different disabilities. We already are targeting English language as a priority. We are already doing all of these pieces. Why are we not at the forefront of this movement? And so there was born, if you will, the idea that the four of us would begin to create something to support the country in terms of their educations and therefore the schools. And so what we came up with was the opportunity to specifically train the teachers that Upward English hires to be resources and leaders in pieces of education that we know to be best practices. We, as in the research suggests, the practice suggests, and provide professional development to that staff in order to be the resources or be the go-to people around those topics, as well as really be seen as leaders in those topics as well. And so we developed a professional development model. And so the focus of that professional development was five-pronged. And we pulled these five different prongs, if you will, from what we know about current research, what we know about child development, what we know as being important when you're educating young children. And so there are five pieces. So the first piece was collaboration and co-teaching, because everyone in Upward English is co-teaching and needing to collaborate, right? The next piece beyond that was that cultural component. So it's not that they are collaborating and co-teaching with people from their culture, but from a different culture. So that adds another layer to that piece. So we talked about that being a really important piece of professional development and digging into those cultural competencies, right, in those dimensions of culture. And how does that connect to how we co-teach? How does that connect to how we educate? How does that connect to how we talk to parents, right? All of those different pieces. We talked about, of course, one of the focuses being English language acquisition, right? Because they're teaching English as a second language, so that should be one of the things that we're talking about. And then the last two is inclusive practices and universal design for learning, so UDL. And those were two pieces that previously had not been targeted, that we were adding in to support that all students piece. And again, all of these pieces came from our understanding of young children, our understanding of education, but also our shared understanding of the system in the Czech schools, our shared understanding of where the country was and where the country was going. And so again, that foundation of understanding led to us taking the research and going, what do teachers need, and how are we going to provide, how are we going to be leaders in that? And so we decided these were the five prongs, of course, based in research, and this also connected to that all students, right? Every student throughout schools should have access or should have teachers who can provide that access. That's something that we talk about in the UWEC program constantly, but not necessarily something that's talked about everywhere, including in the Czech Republic. So we developed this professional development model. We tweaked it. We did the revision after the revision after the, oh, this might be good. Oh, how about this? Oh, we didn't talk about this, right? So we came back to it and we thought, how are we going to measure change, or how are we going to measure whether or not our pilot group, if you will, has made any progress in these 5 different areas. So we decided that we were going to do two types of surveys. So the first survey was a perception of inclusion survey, and the second was a usage rating profile intervention revised survey. So essentially what these two did, so the top one, I'm afraid, oh, there it is, the red button. So the top one was the survey we used only about kiddos who had the possibility of or were diagnosed or had a disability. The last survey we used for the 4 other prongs, if you will, because we were able to change the wording based on what we were asking the participants about. So the first, here's an example from that first survey. All children, regardless of ability, should be included in programs together. Participants, before they started any of our professional development training, identified whether they strongly agreed, disagreed, agreed, or strongly agreed, right? And then the last URP survey, one of the things that we asked or was on the survey was, this intervention is an effective choice for addressing a variety of problems. And so fill in UDL, Universal Design for Learning, or fill in English language acquisition, right? So that intervention piece came out and we were very specific in terms of what we were asking. And so participants got this survey before we did anything, and then after we were finished with our professional development. And our process there was to see, is there change over time in terms of our professional development, what their beliefs or their thoughts are at the beginning of the training. Were we able to speak to, teach to, talk to some of the concepts that would change their perceptions or understanding of inclusion or UDL. So we developed all this, and then it was time to do the work. So in January, we went over to Prague, and we gave the 2 surveys to the participants. We were really lucky because Upward English usually doesn't hire in the winter. They usually only hire in the summertime, but they've been growing so quickly that they actually needed to hire in January. So we had this great opportunity to pilot this professional development, do this work. And so we went over in January and we started and we gave the 2 surveys. And then we provided 3 days of professional development on those 5 topics. Now, 3 days can seem lengthy or like no time at all when you're trying to cover 5 topics, right? And so we really had to conceptualize what is it in this short amount of time that we want to cover and not overload people, but not provide little information. We need to find kind of that happy medium, which was a constant question that we were asking. What do we provide in terms of supports or resources, and what do we wait and hold back until they understand this concept a little more? So it was constant collaboration between ourselves and our partners at Upward English. And then after the 3 days, we gave them the surveys again. So the post surveys at the end of training. Moving forward, we will give those again in June because they will be receiving specific feedback from their Upward English supervisors, if you will, on co-teaching, English language acquisition, and cultural considerations. So they will get continued support there. What they won't get support with is with UDL and with inclusive strategies, and that's purposeful because what we want to see is what happens over time, right? So we gave this great professional development and we saw these things, but then what happens over time when they don't get feedback on that? And so we're going to look at the their understanding or their perceptions in June. Then they are on 2-year contracts. So at the end of their 2 years, we're going to do it one more time so we can see that progression over time. The initial results suggest, right, our brief going over is that it provided some clarity. Our professional development provided clarity for the participants. So this is the example that I gave you before from the second survey. And so what we found is that in the first completion of the survey, our participants fell here in the middle of the slightly agree and slightly disagree. And so there wasn't an I don't know box, right? They couldn't fill out the survey and say, I don't know what UDL is, right? And so we found that the majority of people answered in that slightly agree and slightly disagree. And so when we looked at that, we made the determination that that's sort of a neutral response, right? Like, I might agree a little bit with that, or I might disagree. I'm not really sure. And what we found is that from the first iteration of the taking of the survey to the last, is that participants became very, very clear. And what I mean by that is they were either at a 6 or a 1 solidly across the board. And so they went from like, I'm not so sure, to really definitively a 1 or a 6. There was also a section for comments, and several made the comment of, I wasn't really sure what this was, but I thought I might need to know it for the training, so I kind of just answered what I thought I should, right? So there's that piece that we're going to have to take into consideration too moving forward. So a couple of those comments had come up as well, and that goes in terms of clarity for us. So what do we have to do, Kathy Thorson and myself, in terms of tweaking things or changing things to be clearer, to give the participants different options or different avenues to discuss or identify their learning. So our next steps, we have a monthly collaboration meeting with the Upward English partners that we have. So we Skype with them once a month. We actually just had one this morning. And so they are updating us in terms of where they are. We are supporting them for their coaching and their feedback to their employees. What are some things that are coming up? What are things that are naturally coming up in conversation related to our trainings? What is not, right? And so what we're finding is the things that they're getting feedback on, like co-teaching, are often the questions that they're asking in these meetings, whereas something like universal design for learning, we talked about, it hasn't been talked about since, and they're not bringing it up, right? Which is what we thought over time would happen. We are going to do another training in August. So Kathy is going over in August to solidify the placements for our students for the following year's trip, and also connect with the principals and other entities that Upward English contracts with for our students. So there's that piece, but then the second piece is that we're offering the professional development again for the big intake of teachers in August. And so she will do that live and in person, and I will do that via Skype or Blue Jeans. I'll call Don. Don will tell me how to do all that. He's like the guru. He brings in his big computer. So we're going to provide the professional development again, but here's the piece that I'm excited about is we have what we did, and we've made modifications to what we did initially based on the things that came to the surface while we were doing the professional development. But the second iteration, we're now excited to think about what's the tier 2. So what's the next step for the people that already got that initial training, right? How are we gonna use the data that we get to then guide where we're going in the next step. So thinking about what is that training going to look like in August for the initial folk, but also then the people who have done it before. Of course, we have to give the post-post surveys in June, and then really dive into that data and figure out the different pieces that we want to pull from it, the different avenues we want to go with it, and move from there. So that was the kind of really short version of a like 4 or 5 year long process of going from, hey, this would be really fun to have our students teach in an English immersion school, to, wow, we could really change the way a whole country is navigating teaching all students by leading the way, right? So from there to here in 35 minutes. So, but I think it comes down to the building that capacity, right? Building the capacity to have conversations, building a shared understanding, building trust. And we were able to take a partnership that was supporting high impact practices for our students and continue that, make it better, and come out and do some research with it to support a variety of people, and that has been really powerful for me in that process. So, are there any questions or comments? This is a lovely picture of our first group in the national park of the Czech Republic, which is called Bohemian Switzerland, but it's not in Switzerland at all. It's in fact in the Czech Republic, but it's where the natural bridge is. So if you've ever seen the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the movie, and they're standing on a big land bridge, that's here. So, any questions, comments? Yeah?
What does their school year look like? Ours is like September-ish.
So theirs is September through June, but they are only in school till 12 o'clock. So they start at 8 and they end at 12 because extracurricular activities are very much a priority in the Czech Republic, and so they feel that that beginning piece is the responsibility of the government, and the afternoon piece is the responsibility of the families. So if you want your child to do, 3 hours of violin every afternoon because music is important to your family, then that's what you will do because that's important to you for your child. So the morning is school, as we would kind of identify with, and the afternoon is basically extracurricular things. So that's where a lot of the upward English happens as well, because it's considered part of that extra. Yeah?
How do you see the future as far as if you and or Kathy decide not to go? Is UWEC committed to this? And the same question over there.
Mm-hmm.
Faculty leave there or the preschool?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that?
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things that we've kind of put into place was we're currently doing a search for a new unified early childhood faculty person, and the goal with that person as well is to add on a third faculty member to learn both the program and the research, so that there are 3 of us kind of in that process, if you will. As far as our collaborators abroad, there are currently 4. So it started with Elaine and Marek, and they have grown and grown and grown over the last 4 years. So they have 2 assistant directors. So all 4 of them are part of this process now. We have moved into a variety of schools. So our first time we only went to 1 school. We are now in 4 schools, and there are 3 more just this year coming on, right? So it's growing over time. So if that one principal, let's say, retires, or that one school is no longer available, the teachers are teachers through Upward English and would go to the hope is that we would lose as little momentum as possible if some of those changes were to happen. But yes, it's been one of those things we've been considering for sure. Yeah.
About just the cultural side of what are the value systems there in terms of outcomes. So I'll preface. So if in the U.S., if we were going to look at system change in a school, we'd be really want to think about test scores and this and that, and like these hard measures of whether our change is having an impact on student learning. What's the value system? What is the value system there, and what might be related to it?
So some of that, so they're less interested, from my perception. They have an interest in test scores, not to the extent that we in America do. What they value is the actual application of learning English, and that being an opportunity for all kids, and for kids to leave public education as dual language speakers, because having access to English and being able to speak English is a huge game changer, if you will, for people in the Czech Republic in terms of their ability to reach out internationally, work internationally, be that 21st century learner, if you will. And so it's really that active application of their language knowledge. So can I use this when I go to college? Can I go to an American college and learn in an English classroom? Can I get a job where I need to speak English, right? Can I navigate an international community? Those are also just as important to educators and to families in the Czech Republic as a change in scores. Is that scores are one thing, but can my kid go to an English-speaking school? Yes or no? The answer to that question is very important by the time that they're done. They also very much value nature and being in nature and being able to access nature. So that active application comes as well in the diversity of understanding of the language. So being able to speak English in an educational setting and being able to use it in a leisure setting is also a component of that application too. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for having me.